Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. They only returned to the hotel after surveying Sunrise City through the afternoon. After a discussion, they all went to rest. After dinner and freshening himself up, Hu Yuhao went out at night again. This time, he was focused on surveying what was underground. Although he couldn't use his Eye of Destiny, he could still detect up to 50 meters below ground. If there were problems, he would be able to discover some clues. It wasn't a brilliant method, but he had no choice. Fortunately, Sunrise City wasn't like Radiant City. Otherwise, he needed at least half a year before he could completely survey the entire city with such a method. As he walked, he tried to detect whatever there was underground. He continually used his spiritual power to carry out his detection. If it were any other soul master with a spiritual type martial soul, his spiritual power wouldn't be able to last long even if he had such a detection ability. As he walked, Hu Yuhao entered a bustling street. The two sides of the street were lined with stores and brightly lit. He meticulously detected what was going on underground. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something, and subconsciously lifted his head. Not far in front of him, there was a lady who was dressed to the nines blocking his way. Her looks weren't flattering, she wasn't even at Hu Yuhao's chest level, but her waist was 3 times larger than his. She was in a bright green dress, which made her seem like a watermelon. There were even bright red flowers on her dress. Her chubby face was extremely white, and she had applied even more powder on her face than normal. She had applied blood-red lipstick on her thick lips too. When she blocked Hu Yuhao, a gust of wind that carried the smell of her inferior quality perfume greeted Hu Yuhao. The torrid smell almost caused him to bury his head in the ground. Is this considered a biological weapon? Sir, do you want to come in to have fun? She made a flirtatious gesture at Hu Yuhao and grinned at him, revealing her yellow teeth. Her voice sounded a little sharp and strained. She didn't sound like a guy or a lady. The more frightening thing was that there was a stench that came from her mouth. When it mixed with the perfume from her body, the originally crowded street instantly became empty within a 10-meter region. At least 5 or 6 people collapsed, and Hu Yuhao also stepped back a few steps. There was an astonished look on his face. Sir, come in and have fun. Our ladies are delicious and cheap. No, they are high quality and cheap. The chubby lady pointed to a building which was shining with pink lights as she spoke. The building wasn't very big, and seemed a little dilapidated. The pink lights made the place seem shady, while the stained walls made it seem like a cheap place. All right, lead the way. Hu Yuhao covered his nose and slowly stopped looking so stunned. Oh yes, sir. You have good taste. As the chubby lady heard that Hu Yuhao wanted to enter, she was delighted and pulled him over. However, he dodged her. Don't touch me. Hu Yuhao shouted. All right. Sir, follow me. As she spoke, she was already walking towards the building. As she walked, she even turned back to Hu Yuhao occasionally and said, Sir, you have great taste. You can call me Lingling. Blarg. Hu Yuhao couldn't stand it anymore, and retched before gesturing to the fat lady, or rather, the madam. He was asking her to turn around and not talk to him. Her biological weapon was simply too strong for him. The madam twisted her thick, red lips and turned around unhappily. After she entered the building, she shouted at the top of her voice, Girls, come and receive our customer. Suddenly, a bunch of ladies with thick makeup started to surface from different parts of the building. Their dress followed Lingling's style, which was extremely startling. Hu Yuhao stopped in front of the building and suddenly asked the madam, You're called Lingling, am I right? Is it the same Ling as Feng Ling? After hearing his words, she started trembling. She turned around and was filled with shock as she looked at Hu Yuhao. You. I'll come here to have fun again. After he finished speaking, Hu Yuhao turned around and fled. He used his ghost shadow perplexing track, and quickly disappeared into the crowd without anyone noticing. The madam was shocked as she watched where Hu Yuhao had disappeared. There was an indescribably complex look in her eyes. As for the rest of the ladies that had appeared, they were all shouting tenderly as they chased Hu Yuhao. They were indignant, as they finally had a customer, but he ran away. However, Ling Ling just stood in place without moving. It was as if she had lost her soul. Hu Yuhao fled more than 2 streets before he slowed down. He had confirmed what he needed to confirm. Yes, he recognized that madam. Even though he wasn't familiar with her, he was certain that she was actually a him. Yes, it was a him, not a her. That person was likely to be Feng Ling, whom he had met before. Feng Ling had left a deep impression in Hu Yuhao's mind, because of his stinky mouth, and his saliva that could even cause smoke to fume when it landed on the ground. His lack of hygiene wasn't something an ordinary person could compare to. Feng Ling should be the young master of the Heaven's Gate. Hu Yuhao wasn't even sure which empire the Heaven's Gate came from, but it shouldn't be very strong. Furthermore, it was unlikely that the Heaven's Gate was from the Sun-Moon Empire. Feng Ling tried to take liberties of Wang Donga when they met the Heaven's Gate outside Radiant City. Eventually, he was taught a lesson by Ji Juechen and fled with his sect. Hu Yuhao also recalled that Feng Ling was the young master of the sect. No matter how unhygienic he was, he possessed at least 4 rings, since he could compete in the tournament. However, he was now in a medium-sized city as a madam. He had even changed his gender. What was going on? If he wasn't a member of the Sun-Moon Empire, he had to be one of the hostages. However, he didn't lose his freedom, but his gender and identity had changed. This situation had to be. Earlier, Hu Yuhao had tried to test him when he thought of all these. He knew that he was right when he saw the expression on Ling Ling's face. It was too important of a clue. If he followed the clues that came from Ling Ling, he might be able to find out everything he wanted to. Of course, he might have alarmed the other party with his words earlier. However, it wasn't too much of a problem. After all, Feng Ling didn't know who he was. It wasn't easy to find someone like him in Sunrise City either. Hu Yuhao stopped at a remote corner, and the light around him started to distort. Very soon, he camouflaged himself with his surrounding environment and disappeared. The high-altitude surveillance Soul tools in the sky could detect visual targets, but they weren't equipped with infrared rays or soul power detectors. Current Soul tool technology had yet to reach such a standard. After he camouflaged himself using his imitation, Hu Yuhao didn't rush to leave. He quietly hid in a dark corner and waited. Although he had left, his spiritual detection was still working on Feng Ling. Feng Ling soon recovered from his shock and returned to the streets, where he started to solicit customers once again. However, his image was too disgusting, and no one could be convinced by him. It was very difficult to imagine why the boss of this low-class brothel would let him make a fool out of himself. The only explanation was that the boss was sick in the mind. Hu Yuhao used his spiritual detection to observe Feng Ling meticulously. Very soon, he discovered that Feng Ling's soul power undulations had yet to disappear. This meant that he was still a 4-ringed soul ancestor. After he heard someone call his name, his expression kept on changing and he seemed a little unsettled, and even astonished. This was an important clue to Hu Yuhao. This is why he wasn't anxious at all, and continued to wait silently. Feng Ling only returned to the cheap brothel when it was late into the night, and the shops along the streets were already closed for business. Very soon, the tempting pink lights were extinguished, and everything seemed to turn silent. Not long afterward, a side door of the brothel opened slightly, and a stumpy figure squeezed out. Feng Ling was no longer wearing the bright green dress from earlier. He wore a simpler gown, and observed the outside of the brothel before he snuck out. After this, he quickly walked towards a certain direction. Hu Yuhao also moved at the same time. He silently tailed Feng Ling, but kept a few hundred meters distance from him. Feng Ling passed the streets and alleys before stopping in front of a pointed building after walking for 15 minutes. This building seemed a little worn down, and there weren't any signs on it. The door was unlatched, and Feng Ling entered the building by pushing the door open. Hu Yuhao had been watching him very closely, and thus he could clearly feel Feng Ling's fear when he entered the building. He extended his senses and continued to watch Feng Ling with his spiritual power. However, Hu Yuhao quickly retracted his spiritual power soon after. That was because he was shocked to find out there was a strong undulation of spiritual power coming from this building. While this undulation of spiritual power didn't signify that the other party's spiritual power was greater than Hu Yuhao's, the other party might still detect Hu Yuhao's presence. Hu Yuhao crept forward towards the unlatched door and peeked into the building through a slight gap. It was pitch dark inside, and the air seemed to be much dirtier than outside. Even with Hu Yuhao's vision, he couldn't see what was going on inside clearly. He wasn't surprised by this. Instead, he broke out into a slight smile that carried a trace of cold intent. At this point, he heard a tragic scream resonating from inside. It sounded very pathetic, but it wasn't loud. If not for the fact that he was at the door, he wouldn't have heard the scream. At this point, he sensed that the strong spiritual undulations coming from inside had retracted. He couldn't give up on such an opportunity. He unleashed his spiritual detection and started to survey the inside of the building. There was a spacious hall behind the door, which was pitch black right now. The polluted air came from some unknown origin. For safety purposes, Hu Yuhao controlled his spiritual detection to follow the sides of the rooms and surveyed one round before he entered another hall at the back through the last door. Tragic screams started to reverberate before the voice of a person sounded. Lowly fatso. I'll whip you to death, I'll whip you to death, ha ha ha. Keep screaming. Scream louder. A hysterical, hoarse voice, extremely awful voice sounded. As this voice sounded, the air rippled slightly. Hu Yuhao's spiritual detection wasn't like before. He could clearly sense how strong the owner of this voice was. It's definitely an evil soul master. It has to be. From his observations earlier, along with how he saw Feng Ling soliciting customers on the streets as a madam, he guessed that this sort of perverted doing must have been committed by an evil soul master. What he was seeing now verified his guess. However, this evil soul master that was abusing Feng Ling had at least 8 rings. Hu Yuhao was able to make an accurate judgment from the spiritual undulations he released as he lost control of his emotions. This building was weird. Earlier, he had scanned this direction using his spiritual detection. However, he didn't discover anything. There were indeed members of the Holy Ghost Church here, but the number of evil soul masters was unknown. Hu Yuhao extended his spiritual detection carefully towards the direction of the voices. Very soon, he saw a bloody scene that made him nauseous. It was a dark, circular hall. There were many broken bodies on the floor, and organs were strewn everywhere. All the blood on the floor had already dried up and turned purplish black. Feng Ling hung in the center of this hall, and there was a person decked in a black robe beneath him. This person released black fog from his body and was holding a bone whip, with which he whipped Feng Ling unceasingly. There were a few fat people squirming in a corner not far from them. They appeared very dreary, and seemed to be on the verge of death. Hu Yuhao's killing intent was piqued as he saw this scene. This despicable evil soul master must have abused and killed many people, otherwise this place wouldn't look like a hell on earth. At this point, his spiritual detection seemed to jerk, as if it had been shocked by electricity. The person in black, who was whipping Feng Ling, turned around and roared in fury, "Who?" As he turned around, Hu Yuhao realized that it was actually a she. Her face was extremely pale to the point where it was scary, although it was evident that her original appearance was pretty decent. However, her eyes were bloodshot, and there was a terrifying feel about her now. A strong wave of spiritual power was unleashed from her body, and her 8 soul rings, 2 yellow, 2 purple and 4 black, surfaced at this moment. A huge, black shadow appeared behind her, and her fierce look caused the surrounding spiritual undulations to become stronger. Even with Hu Yuhao's spiritual cultivation, this sudden change caused him to turn a little dizzy, and he quickly retracted his spiritual power before fleeing immediately. Just as he burst off, a black figure had already rushed out from the door, and a low-pitched roar echoed in the air. This black figure knew exactly where Hu Yuhao had escaped to, and quickly pursued him. In fact, Hu Yuhao wasn't careless at all. He was extremely cautious, but luck wasn't on his side. After he was discovered and pursued, he realized that he had met a spiritual type evil soul master. In addition, her martial soul was similar to an avenging spirit. She was a little like Nana, but she was much stronger. Because of this, the gap between their spiritual power wasn't as great as he had expected. When his spiritual detection got too close, she immediately sensed something amiss, and discovered traces of it. Then, she locked onto his body as she followed the trail of his spiritual power and pursued him. As a result, his imitation was unable to help him escape her pursuit. However, they were both almost invisible because of their spiritual power, and wouldn't be detected by the high-altitude surveillance soul tools in the sky. What do I do now? Hu Yuhao was quickly assessing his situation right now and thinking of a plan of action. Run? Given his current cultivation, how could he possibly outrun an 8-ringed soul Doluo? Since you are pursuing me, then. He thought of the bloody scene he saw earlier, and a cold look flashed in his eyes. His killing intent also became stronger. It had to be said that Hu Yuhao was rather good at escaping her pursuit. If he escaped in a straight line, he would definitely be caught after a while. However, he made turns around the streets and alleys. While this evil soul master was pursuing him through his spiritual power, he could escape her pursuit, given the strength of his spiritual cultivation, if he used his Eye of Destiny. However, he didn't choose to do so. He only kept on unleashing his spiritual power to interfere with her judgment, so that she would make slight errors. While she kept on pursuing him, she wasn't able to catch him. 2 invisible figures were moving quickly and making rounds in Sunrise City just like that. They were so quick that seeing them even made one breathless. Slowly, the advantage of this evil soul master's cultivation was taking effect. She was getting closer and closer to Hu Yuhao. Suddenly, she peered into the sky and let out an inaudible cry. When she let out this cry, the sky within several hundred square meters around her started to distort. At this instant, all the high-altitude surveillance soul tools that surveilled this region weren't able to function properly. The civilians on the streets weren't affected, but Hu Yuhao felt as if he had been hammered. He only heard a piercing scream echoing deep in his spirit. At this instant, he felt that his head was about to blow apart. The tremendous pain he felt numbed his entire spirit. This is... Hu Yuhao was wide-eyed in shock. It shouldn't be a soul skill, as he didn't sense any undulations from the soul rings of this evil soul master. It had to be a fighting technique that she had invented herself. This was a fighting technique that Hu Yuhao had never seen before. It wasn't just unleashed through pure spiritual power, and it wasn't a combination of spiritual and soul power either. Rather, it was formed using spiritual power and sound waves. Through her immense spiritual power, she managed to enhance the strength of her spirit, which enabled her to influence Hu Yuhao's spirit through terrifying sound waves. It was extremely frightening. If not for Hu Yuhao's great spiritual power that spurred him to instinctively defend himself, his head would have blown apart by now. Simply put, it was like a terrifying scream had appeared in Hu Yuhao's mind. He tolerated the numb feeling for now and leapt over a wall. When this evil soul master unleashed her attack, she seemed to experience a temporary delay in her movements, and wasn't able to exploit this opportunity to catch up to Hu Yuhao. Ah! She groaned. Evidently, she was very confident in her fighting technique. However, she was confused about why it didn't achieve the effect she had expected. Hu Yuhao could tell her cultivation, and thus it was natural that she could tell what his cultivation was too. She could sense that his cultivation wasn't very high even with his immense spiritual power, and knew that he was inferior to her. In her opinion, she should have destroyed him with her previous attack. Even if he wasn't killed, he should have been critically injured. However, Hu Yuhao only stalled for a moment before he escaped towards a residential area. Such a weak soul master is able to possess such great spiritual power. Interesting. She revealed a grin on her face. As she pointed her toes to the ground, she drifted up like a spectre before she charged downward like a bolt of lightning. Hu Yuhao was still affected by the scream earlier, and was evidently moving much slower now. Furthermore, it seemed like his imitation was getting weaker and weaker, and his figure was starting to show. Go and die. Grudge? A strange voice that was low-pitched and hoarse, yet sharp, sounded in Hui Yuhao's ear. Following this, a strange, illusory projection appeared above Hui Yuhao's head. This projection was white, but only Hui Yuhao could sense it. Suddenly, he felt his spirit getting colder, and he started to shudder. His spiritual sea started to rage with waves, and he felt that he was about to lose control of his body. A crazy thought also started to rise internally. However, he didn't continue to flee at this moment. On the contrary, he stopped and turned around. The evil soul master saw a pair of bright, clear eyes that carried a deep gaze. Following this, a dim golden projection rose from Hui Yuhao's body. As golden lights flashed, her grudge in the air was crushed. Ah, interesting. She drifted to the ground and didn't continue attacking. She stared at Hui Yuhao with a strange look in her bloodshot eyes. Spiritual type soul master. Very rare. Your spiritual cultivation has long surpassed your actual cultivation. She seemed to become like a normal person right now, apart from her looks. Hui Yuhao replied, "That's right. You must be a spiritual type soul master too. However, the paths that we are taking are evidently different. Your martial soul should be an avenging spirit." He. She let out a shrilling laugh, which was filled with hysteria and sarcasm. Avenging spirit? Is my martial soul an avenging spirit? No, you are wrong. My martial soul isn't an avenging spirit. No. Hui Yuhao was the shocked one right now. What is it then? She opened her eyes wide and replied, "My martial soul is called the spirit of retribution." Spirit of retribution? Is there such a martial soul? Hui Yuhao couldn't believe what she was saying. Why isn't there such a martial soul? I created it myself. Isn't it magical? He. She was laughing, but her laughter sounded very forlorn. Hui Yuhao squinted. Self-created martial soul. I know. Your martial soul is mutated, isn't it? No. She replied with 3 numbers and her forlorn voice turned callous. Have you seen a mutated martial soul that only awakened when the soul master was 15? No, you haven't. My martial soul came from hatred, a deep hatred. When my hatred reached its extreme, my spirit of retribution appeared. I killed her. I want revenge. All of you can go and die. She suddenly went berserk and mimicked a lifting action. Following this, her 2nd, 3rd and 5th soul rings lit up at the same time. A weird white glow spread from her body, and countless grudges appeared above Hui Yuhao and started to spread in all directions. At this point, she saw a soul ring shining. It was a clear white soul ring that flashed with a dim golden color. When its light spread from Hui Yuhao's body, his eyes started to shine brightly and turned shiny and translucent. Purplish gold light that seemed to be illuminated by countless streaks of starlight flashed before disappearing. Ah, the female evil soul master's head suddenly rocked back, and she even staggered a few steps. The huge avenging spirit that had been drifting behind her all this while was dissipated before it reformed. The grudges that she had released earlier were also immediately crushed. Spiritual shock. It was Hui Yuhao's spiritual shock in the concrete immaterial realm. Hui Yuhao's body shook slightly. After all, this evil soul master's cultivation was too strong, far superior to his. Although Hui Yuhao had an advantage in terms of his spiritual power, a fight between soul masters didn't just involve spiritual power. Moreover, her spiritual world was filled with a grim sense of evil. While Hui Yuhao's spiritual shock struck her, he also suffered from a backlash. Of course, she was hurt much more than him. As he stepped forward with his left leg, the look in his eyes suddenly turned gentle. A golden projection appeared behind him before embracing him and fusing with his body. Hui Yuhao's gaze turned gentle. At this moment, his eyes didn't reflect the look of the evil soul master in front of him. There was only a look of remembrance in his eyes right now. Remembrance was a very magical thing. Right now, Hui Yuhao unleashed his fist of remembrance, which contained a surging feeling of remembrance. A fist with an indescribable color, but which yet seemed to shine with a glow that encompassed all colors, was unleashed towards the evil soul master. At this point, the evil soul master was still suffering under the effects of Hui Yuhao's spiritual shock. However, she was still a soul doluo, and it wouldn't be so easy to curb her. Just as Hui Yuhao's fist of remembrance was about to strike her, her body suddenly dissipated like a specter. She changed into countless black projections that spread around. Each projection had the same look as her. However, a sharp scream sounded at this point. All the black projections regathered and appeared where she was originally. It was as if she had been struck by Hui Yuhao's fist. Her body was covered by a layer of shiny light as she screamed. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. This is. Hui Yuhao didn't say anything. He exerted a force with his front left foot, and it seemed like he was being lifted up. He raised his right fist and pointed his middle and index fingers forward. The glow that seemed to encompass all colors suddenly shot into the sky and turned into a sword light that was more than 10 meters long. Hui Yuhao's expression also changed. The gentle look in his eyes turned into pain. He pursed his lips tightly, and he appeared to have teared up. His mind seemed to have gone to another world too. The majestic sword light descended from the sky. One swordplay could only reach the peak if he handled his relationship well. This time, it was Hui Yuhao's sword of longing, a sword which would never be forgotten. The evil soul master was in a daze as she looked at the sword light that was coming down. Her state of mind was already affected because of Hui Yuhao's fist earlier. As she was also a spiritual type soul master, she was also more influenced than any other opponent. Her spirit of retribution relied on immense hatred. However, she was forced into a state of remembrance by Hui Yuhao. Her sense of danger roused her instincts. She lifted her hands, and her seventh soul ring shone. The huge avenging spirit behind her drifted forward and fused with her body. She turned into a specter, but she didn't attack or resist Hui Yuhao's attack. Instead, she turned around and fled. She wanted to escape from the sword light that was crashing down towards her. However, how could she escape Hui Yuhao's sword of longing after she was struck by his fist of remembrance? Hui Yuhao's sword of longing immediately tore her avenging spirit to pieces. Wherever this sword light passed, spots of bright light were left behind in the air. It was as if tears of remembrance had been scattered in the air. The crushed spirit of retribution was reformed. However, it was no longer in the state of a martial soul true body. Rather, it regained the appearance of the evil soul master. Hui Yuhao should be proud of his sword of longing. Without his sixth soul ring, he managed to force an 8-ringed soul doluo out of her martial soul true body using his self-created fighting skill. This showed how strong he was. More astonishingly, the female evil soul master's eyes were no longer bloodshot, and the look in her eyes became similar to Hui Yuhao's. Hui Yuhao had gone into closed-door cultivation for several months, and fused his various abilities. He had perfectly combined his spiritual and soul power through his emotions, forming his 3 great skills. No matter how strong his opponent was, she would be affected by him if she wasn't emotionally resilient enough to resist the invasion of his spiritual power. These 3 great skills were mainly controlled using Hui Yuhao's spiritual power, as his spiritual power was far superior to his soul power. When he was able to increase his soul power to a comparable level and unleash these 3 skills, he would be able to establish himself as one of the strongest soul masters on the continent. After unleashing his sword, Hui Yuhao was already crying. He pulled his palm back to his waist before flipping it over. He formed the shape of a heart in the air, and all the lights were retracted at this instant. There was now an additional heart at the center of his palm. It was a golden heart. Even the most dazzling gem in this world couldn't compare to the glow from this golden heart. This golden heart represented a sincere heart. It was filled with eternal love and remembrance. Hui Yuhao shut his eyes. At this moment, there was only one figure in his mind. There was no other person or thing that could affect his state of mind. He was already deeply immersed in his thoughts of Wang Donga. Donga, Donga, Donga. He was gently calling in his heart. He seemed to see Wang Donga, and how she sacrificed her life for him without any hesitation. Donga, Donga. As he called, that shining, golden heart slowly moved as he pushed his palm forward. In the sky, the clouds moved, and thunder rumbled. After an inky blackness filled the sky, it suddenly lit up. The lights came from an unknown origin, but they formed a heart shape. The signals from the three closest surveillance soul tools were scrambled. After this, their formation arrays blew apart, and they were destroyed. That huge and seemingly boundless heart resonated with the golden heart on Huiyuhao's palm. Behind the heart in the sky, there seemed to be a beautiful face watching everything that was happening on the ground with a gentle gaze. As Huiyuhao pushed his palm out, and the two hearts resonated with each other, it seemed as if countless flowing lights shone behind Huiyuhao's back. There were only memories of him and Wang Donga within those flowing lights. Huiyuhao's Haodong palm, a palm which would last eternally. This was the last strike of Huiyuhao's three great skills. It was also his first time unleashing this strike with all his heart. He didn't know it yet, but he had already established his position in the world of soul masters as he unleashed this palm. Kai, when his palm was imprinted on the evil soul master's body, she didn't experience any tremendous movement, because of his strike, as she came charging towards it. Part 1 end here.